Video games. So I have played a lot of video games in my life. I don't know about you, but as a teenager especially, I spent many hours solving very exciting problems, saving a lot of princesses. And lately, well, actually, since I've been an adult, I don't have as much time anymore, unfortunately, because of responsibilities at home, but more so actually because of this job that I have. But I did manage to find some time to do research on playing video games with the help of a very talented group of people, of which a substantial part comes from Estonia. So I'm very excited to share our work so far with you. So video games, it's part of a broader human behavioral pattern, playing games. Game is a structured form of play with rules and goals, and it's quite universal. It's been around across all historical periods that we know of and all cultures. And it's fun to play games, it's entertaining, but it also serves some functions. It's good for social bonding, for practicing how to compete and how to cooperate, and especially for children who seem to like playing games a lot more. It's very important to prepare for real-life challenges by letting them simulate situations and within those simulations experiment and learn safely. But since the 1970s, there has been a new type of game in our world, and it's video games. And it has gone through a great evolution. It started with these pixelated games. The first game was Pong. I don't know if you know it, with this pixelated ball and these two bars that hit the ball, and it has evolved to very realistic interactive experiences. And for some people, video games are more than just a hobby. It's a big cultural phenomenon and an economic phenomenon as well. There's more money being made in the video game industry than in the music game industry and the movie industry combined multiple times. So there's been a lot of research on the effects of playing video games. It's been associated with both negative and positive outcomes. The positive outcomes being having a lot to do with cognitive abilities, things like visual processing or reaction time, memory, and also some higher level cognitive outcomes like problem solving and strategic thinking, all skills that are very useful in daily life. But of course, gaming, too much gaming specifically, can also have adverse effects, especially for people that are sensitive for addiction. Playing too much game is not always considered a positive phenomenon. So in this study, we asked, can we learn about the relationship between playing video games and cognitive or health or well-being outcome by looking at their relationship with DNA? So as many of you probably know, most, if not all of our behaviors have some heritable component. It's been established, especially with twin studies, where identical twins are compared with fraternal twins. And if in some behaviors the identical twins resemble each other more, a trait is said to be heritable. Well, almost all of the behavioral traits we look at have this, including playing video games. But now we have moved on to this new genomics era, where we are able to actually link the genetic variants to the outcomes and see where this heritability comes from. And at the base of this new era is this study design called the Genome-Wide Association Study, or a GWAS for short. And it has evolved to And in this study design, we measure millions of genetic variants for large groups of people, and we associate every single variant with the trait to see if it's associated with it. It's a nice hypothesis-free design, and it has been delivering quite robust, replicable associations between genetics and a lot of complex outcomes. One big lesson that we've learned is that all these individual genetic effects are super tiny, which means that you need very big sample sizes to be able to detect them. So individually, all these genetic effects are very tiny, but if you sum them up, then they become quite considerable. But in order to be able to estimate them, we need very big sample sizes. And since we've realized it, you can see here that in the last 5 years, the sample sizes have more than tripled. And we now realize that we need hundreds of thousands of people to do these studies well. And the biobanks are a big factor of this big increase in sample sizes. And two of the most important biobanks happen to have asked their participants about how often they play video games. So in the UK Biobank, we have about 455,000 people where they ask, do you ever play a video game? And then when we found out that Estonian Biobank also asked this question, that really took this study to another level. And what you see here when you look at the prevalences is that actually the majority does not seem to be playing a lot of video games, but that maybe has to do with the average age of these participants. For the UK Biobank, that's like 56 years old, they're 40 years or older. And in the Estonian Biobank of this specific sample, the average age was about 47, 48, I think. Yeah, so we ran a GWAS, genome-wide association study, combining these two big samples, and we have quite a lot of signal. We have 52 independent significant associations, so 52 locations in the genome of which we know that they are significantly associated with how much people like to play video games. So that's nice. That gives us a place to start if you are like interested in the biology, or you can chase these genes. But the reality is we don't really know what this genetic signal contains. So a lot of the work is trying to figure out what are we actually capturing, because there's not a gene that encodes for whether you like playing video games or not. These genetic effects, they influence very low-level biological outcomes with lots of different functions, and these influence these higher-level traits, and these traits influence each other, and these traits also influence what environment you are exposed to. And this environment influences you and all these traits and even your biology, and all of this gets caught up in the GWAS signal, so it's quite a challenge to try to find out what this genetic signal means. But even without actually knowing what it means, you can still use these genetic signals in practice. Specifically through something called a polygenic score. So a polygenic score uses the genetic effects that are estimated in these GWAS. And if you then measure DNA of another participant, you can use those genetic effects to compute sort of a genetic predisposition for that person. It's quite a noisy estimate. So far, polygenic scores explain only 1 or a couple of % of variation. But the larger this GWAS is, the more precise these genetic effect estimates are, and the better you can estimate these polygenic scores. So let's say that here we have a G. Let's say we estimated that adds 0.01% to your chance of liking video games. This individual carries 2 Gs, so he gets 2 times 0.01% added to his score. And the better you estimate all these effects, the more predictive your polygenic score gets. And you can do a lot of interesting things with these polygenic score, like using them in clinical settings is still a bit controversial because of their noisiness and and because we don't know exactly what they're capturing. But for research purposes, it gives very nice opportunities, like looking at the effects of environment and genetics and how those interact together. With playing video games as an outcome, we have this really nice environmental factor, which is whether video games existed at all or not. We have, because of the age of these participants, we have one group that grew up as a child when video games came out. So the first video game, consumer video game, came out in 1971. That was that Pong video game. If you were a child in that time, you were able to grow up with a video game, but we also have a group of people that when they were children, their video games didn't exist yet, so they did other things like play outside, for example. And you see both in UK Biobank and in Estonian Biobank this nice increase in males, exclusively almost, this increase in playing video games if they were a child when video games were invented. In the Estonian Biobank, you see sort of a delay of 20 years. So where that increase starts in 1971 for UK Biobank, in Estonian Biobank it starts in 1991, and that's probably because that's when the Soviet Union fell and the markets opened up for all the Western goods, including video games and video game consoles. So what we did here was we built a polygenic score for playing video games. We used genetic effects estimated in Estonia and used those to build the polygenic score in British people in the UK. And then we asked, does the polygenic score predict the outcome differently in people that grew up playing video games versus people that didn't? And we saw a very significant interaction in males where the genetics had a stronger effect in men that grew up with video games than in men that did not. And we did not see this effect in women. And this means probably that there are some genetic effects that are active in children when they get exposed to playing video games that makes them more likely to play video games if they're grown-ups. So these kinds of gene-environment interactions are notoriously hard to replicate. So they've been reported for all kinds of mental health and cognitive outcomes. For depression, for example, there's been a study that looked at whether polygenic scores predicted depression better for people that were exposed to trauma as a child. But these seem very hard to replicate. So I've seen publications and then publications that don't replicate it. But here we have the luxury of this environmental factor being so clearly related to the outcome, but also having the Estonian Biobank where we can do the exact reverse, use the genetic effects as estimated in the UK to build the polygenic score in the Estonian Biobank. And then ask the same question, does this polygenic score, based on UK effects, does this predict differently in these two groups in the Estonian Biobank? When we use a cutoff of like the 1997, or 1971, I mean, we see a significant effect. So I read that video games were available, but you have to really look at it for it in like sort of the underground market. It did not replicate in the female group. It was more significant than in the UK Biobank. But if we use that cutoff of 1991, then it becomes way more significant in men and even a little bit significant in women, where genetics have a stronger effect if you grew up with video games than if you did not. And you see in women, you see a slightly higher increase here in the end, probably because it's a somewhat younger cohort than in the UK Biobank here in Estonia. So that's I thought that was a very exciting thing to find. Gene-environment interactions are hard. Intuitively, everyone thinks, of course, the genes interact with the environment, but to find these interactions where genetics act differently in different environments is quite hard. But still, we don't know what we are actually capturing with that polygenic score. So there are different ways of trying to figure that out. So these polygenic scores, they're probably capturing both, like all kinds of different underlying traits and also some environmental effects. I've done an analysis where I estimated how much of it is environment. By controlling for family environment, it was about 20%, so 80% is like really direct genetic effects. And one way to get an idea of what you are capturing with these polygenic scores is genetic correlations. I hope this matrix doesn't look too scary. I know that probably a lot of these traits cannot be read. What I wanted to illustrate really by showing the complete matrix is how many traits we can include in such an analysis. And that's the nice thing of genetics. If you didn't have genetics and you wanted to know what traits are associated with playing video games, you've had to measure how much video games people play, and then all the traits that you're interested in the same group, which is quite limiting. But if you have a GWAS on playing video games, usually in this field, when we finish a GWAS, we share all of our GWAS summary statistics, so you can just download any GWAS that has been, almost all the GWAS that have been conducted, and then compare those genetic effect estimates between the traits, and you get something called a genetic correlation. So we see a lot of significant associations with a lot of physical health outcomes, like a higher BMI, but also like heart problems, but also a lot of behavioral traits here on the left. So I'm going to zoom in on the behavioral traits a bit. And we saw a lot, quite interesting patterns here. One, the first one actually that I saw that made me decide this is an interesting trait, we have to look at this, is that it has quite a strong, very significant positive genetic correlation with intelligence and things like memory and reaction time, but a negative genetic correlation with educational attainment and income. And normally when something correlates positively with IQ, it also correlates positively with education and income. We're not quite sure where this discrepancy comes from. We're still looking at it, but I think, yeah, so to really enjoy video games and get lost in those worlds, you need certain level of cognitive abilities. But if you get lost in those games, maybe you don't have as much time left anymore to do well in school or on the job market. We also see some interesting correlations with psychiatric disorders, like a positive genetic correlation with autism, ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder for some reason, and negative with psychiatric disorders, like anorexia, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and OCD, which means that a higher genetic risk for liking video games means a lower genetic risk for anorexia, bipolar, schizophrenia, or OCD. So we're not sure where the causality here lies. We have some analyses on that. I will tell you about it later. And for addiction, we saw something unexpected, namely that it's only significantly associated with smoking behavior, but not with caffeine, cannabis, or alcohol addictions, only smoking for some reason. Positively associated with loneliness and risk-taking, and some interesting personality associations, positive with openness, negatively with agreeableness and conscientiousness. And what's also interesting is that the Estonian Biobank and UK Biobanks show such similar signals. So the genetic correlation is quite high. I had a bet with Uku how high it was going to be. He betted 0.8, I bet 0.9, 9. I was a bit more optimistic, hopeful, maybe. We bet for a beer, and it turned out that, well, at first it came out 0.84, and then we adjusted, like a parameter had to be adjusted, the imputation panel, to match UK Biobank, and then it became 0.86. But so it depends on the parameter who won, so I guess we'll maybe have to buy both each other a beer tonight. And what was also really great about this contribution from the Estonian Biobank, it didn't only increase the statistical power, but you have phenotypes that are in such high resolution. For example, all the different items of the big 5 personality dimensions were available in such large numbers that we could try to get a better idea of what these personality associations mean. So we used the polygenic score in Estonian Biobank that was computed using these genetic effect estimates in the UK, and then associated them with all these individual level items, and they made these nice, what they call spider plots for me, where you could see this for openness to experience. It's not just a simple positive associations, but there are some items that are more strongly associated than others, like liking to solve complex problems, or love to think of new ways of doing things. And then for conscientiousness, leaving a mess in a room is one of the, if not the strongest predictor for conscientiousness. Extraversion, we saw some interesting results. Let others take advantage of me, for some reason, is the strongest here. I'm not sure what that means. And then for agreeableness, like to compete and do everything I can do to win is one of the strongest ones. Neuroticism, often feel like others misunderstand me or often feel lonely, so loneliness also showed a significant positive association. So quite interesting results that we're still looking into and trying to interpret. And we did some more polygenic score analyses. We combined the UK Biobank and Estonian Biobank genetic estimates to increase the power of this polygenic score, and then built them in 3 data sets, one from the Netherlands called the Netherlands Twin Register, one from Germany called Twin Life, and one from the US called ABCD. So we're still looking into these results, but we can, well, they clearly predict whether people play video games in these countries. They also predict intelligence measures more in adults than in children. Addictive behaviors, we saw that they predicted smoking outcomes, but not alcohol use. And some mental health outcomes, we also replicated what we saw in the genetic correlation analyses. But this still doesn't say much about the direction of causality. Genetic data allows for this sort of experimental design where each parent carries 2 alleles and then passes randomly one down to their offspring. That allows for some causal inference called Mendelian randomization. But it's quite hard with very complex traits to do this without confounders. But so far, we did not find much evidence for the causality in psychiatric mental health outcomes. The most consistent one was from gaming causing higher IQ. Well, if that is true, that would be quite spectacular finding. I think it's quite hard to find things that increase IQ. So this is stuff we are still all working with this incredible team from over the world, with a big representation from Estonian Biobank, both in the sample size but also in the manpower for the analyses. People like Kelly, the 2 Kadris, and Uku, thank you very much. And thank you also for inviting me to share this exciting work.
There is a question from the audience. I think in the later slides you already answered it, but just to clarify, there was a question in the middle of the presentation. Is there a link to any other addiction in relation to this polygenic score?
Yes, I think gambling addiction was also significant. Yeah, yeah. So we did not have a good GWAS on gambling behavior, so we couldn't do the genetic correlation, but we could do polygenic score analysis, and that showed gambling is also.
Okay. And what about chocolate addiction?
Chocolate, that wasn't included.
It wasn't included. Okay.
It was positively associated with BMI, though.
Because there is a stereotype that when you have gamers, video gamers, they like to drink a lot of energy drinks.
Oh.
Was there something connection? This is a prototype.
Caffeine was not significant, I know that. Yeah.
Chips and this is what when you have this kind of a LAN party vision or kind of a stereotype. But anyway, Abdel, we kindly thank you for your time, for giving us the overview, and well. You do like chocolate.
I love chocolate.
Yeah, so maybe there is a link because you like to play video games and you like chocolate as well. So maybe there is a link, or maybe you're an exception. Anyway, it's up to the science to decide. Thank you, Abdel.
Thank you so
much.
much.
On behalf of the organizers.